Okay, so only about four of you have turned in assignment number 3. It is due, Thursday at midnight? I think it's Thursday. You can check the date on Canvas. I suspect that is because, and it is just a supposition, I suspect that's because a lot of you haven't spent very much time looking at it yet. But in case some of you do have some pressing problems about it, I'll take a few minutes to try and field any questions that you have about it right now. Anything? Okay, so yeah, let me know. I don't think it's easy. I think it's doable, but I wouldn't put it under the category of easy necessarily. So it's not easy. So I expect you will have some questions potentially, and that's fine. I'm happy to answer them individually. But yeah, don't wait to the very last second to start working on it, because then you will not have time, most likely. I'd like to remind everyone to please cover both your mouth and your nose while you are in the room, because you may not know you're sick, and you might be breathing your sickness all over the keyboard in front of you. We would like to try and avoid that. So yeah, let's just stick to that. I know this is lecture 6. So that means we're 5.5 weeks into this. We're so close to like having the momentum we need to make it to the end. So let's not fall down on our faces, so to speak. Right as we're in the middle of the semester. Okay, keep on being careful. All right, so let's talk about scheduling, because that's where we are. We're still talking about scheduling and some of the things that go into scheduling. Now, last week we talked about section 3.1 and 3.2, I believe it was, from the book, where we talked about batch scheduling, or scheduling programs that don't need very much interaction with the user. And we saw several different kinds of scheduling algorithms and talked about, more importantly than, and this is true for today as well, more importantly than the specifics of the scheduling algorithms, we want to know why you might choose one scheduling algorithm over another, right? What are the design decisions? What are the forces that drive us to come up with new scheduling algorithms? What are we trying to accomplish with each of those scheduling algorithms? Okay, so we talked about batch processes. Today we're going to talk about and expand into interactive processes. And that is what it sounds like. Interactive processes are those processes that accept and respond to inputs from users. Okay? And the difference between those two sort of types of processes kind of changes what our primary goal is. Okay? And we talked about this on balance just a little bit last week, but it's even worse for interactive processes, because our main goal then is to maximize throughput into the system, or through the system. And what I mean by throughput is I need to maximize the appearance that as many interactions are being responded to as possible in a shortest amount of time. Okay? And the only way to maximize that is to respond to the most interactions within a shortest amount of time. Okay? The kinds of things that we've talked about before are still in play, though. We still have processes that might be blocked waiting on outside something or another. Okay? And that's fine. We move them to blocked. And once they're released on some resource, and they move back to ready. Okay? And we're like mad doing context switches out of running onto ready, out of ready onto running. Okay? Because we don't want to let one process Bogart. You guys know what that means? Bogart. Am I old? Ever heard that before? I am old. Don't answer that question. But I've got a child half your age. Bogart. So Humphrey Bogart. Is that name familiar to you? Ancient black and white actor who was in many movies that like your great grandparents loved. Okay, and one of the things about Humphrey Bogart is he was always smoking. Okay, so this actually is drug related. So don't tell the dean that I told you about this, right? But the when you have a marijuana cigarette and you are passing it around the room, and someone is smoking on that cigarette more than everybody else, they are said to be bogarting that cigarette. Okay, it doesn't have to be about drugs, and it's not. It's about computers, right? And so when they process bogarts the processor, is because they're sitting on it forever. Okay, and they're not letting anybody else use the processor. Now, by God, you'll remember that, won't you? Because that's not what we want, right? That's not what we want. Instead, what we want is what's that? We want throughput. Okay? Now, that said, we have to be okay with the idea that things, and by things I mean processing the requests of processes take time. And they take different amounts of time. They take different amounts of time depending on what the process is, what the request is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So that's fine. We can't change this. Scheduling, no kind of scheduling can affect this. Okay? No kind of scheduling can affect that. That's not what we're about. Okay? So, to the best of our ability, we're either going to ignore this or hold it constant. And we just know that some things take time. Okay? Some things take time. And that's got to be okay. But what we can do is we can strike a balance, okay? A balance between waiting needlessly, okay, and context switching needlessly. Sometimes it's good to wait. Sometimes it's necessary to wait. Sometimes waiting takes up less time than context switching. Okay? Because the thing about context switching is switching takes time. What am I actually talking about when I say the term context switching? Okay, context switching.
Switching which process is running.
Okay, is that what you were going to say in the back?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, switching what process is running. So specifically what that means is unloading all the values in the processor and storing them for later use, okay? This includes all the registers. This includes the stack pointer, the program counter, all the registers that might have temporary values in them, okay? And storing those for later use, and all of the memory about the process itself, the instructions of the process itself, and then loading old values for another process, okay? And you can imagine this doesn't happen immediately, okay? Loading things, unloading things, saving things, reading things from wherever they've been saved. Those are all in themselves instructions that take time for the processor to do, okay? So it's critical to realize that switching, context switching, is actually expensive, okay? There's an expense associated with it. And so what we're after is this balance that seems to give us the best throughput by avoiding needlessly waiting and at the same time avoiding switching too much. Okay, does that make sense? So, how do we do that? Well, I'm going to go over a handful of algorithms that help us do this. The other wrinkle that I really haven't talked about yet, but the other wrinkle is priority. Okay? Because the other thing to keep in mind, and I'll just put this over here in its own little box, is that not all of the processes need to be run with the same urgency. Okay? So we have to encapsulate the need or the needfulness to run a process. And even if we can do that, then how do we leverage the scheduler's information? How do we leverage information about a process's or a group of processes' priorities and get the scheduler to give the highest priority thing first? Okay? Here's the most straightforward. Oh, you guys can't see. But I'm getting faster at realizing that. Here's the most straightforward way to do that. This is RR for short. All of these have shorthands, but I'm going to use their full names because sometimes their full names are instructive. This one is round robin scheduling. Do you guys know what a round robin is? So a couple of you are shaking your heads. Those of you who have been in sports or have looked at sports or anything like that are probably aware of this notion. The round robin in the sports world is where you have a tournament where everybody plays everybody else, okay? And you get the results out of that, okay? At least for a first round. I actually looked up what the etymology of round robin is. And like so many other things in English, it's a bastardization of French. And not really all that interesting, but still, I was trying to come up with a good way to remember it. But round robin scheduling just means, look, everyone gets a turn. And by everyone, I mean all the processes. All the processes get a turn. Okay? To facilitate this, we have the notion of a time quanta. Okay? A chunk of time. A period of time. And in particular, the time quanta represents a specific chunk of time that the current process gets to have access to the processor. Okay? With round robin scheduling, the time quanta is a system-wide value, constant for everybody who wants to get on the system. Okay? Told you this is simple. It is. So effectively, let's say you've got your processor out here. Okay, and this is your processor. Or if you prefer, it might say AMD on it. I don't know. I don't want to start any fights. Okay? It's got your processor here, and there is a line. Okay? And the processes are going toward that processor. Okay? And this is what the scheduling looks like. So the first guy to get here runs up to the processor. No one's on the processor. No one's in line. No one's on the processor. So he gets served. Right? He's done. He's on the processor now. Okay? While he's processing, some other guys wander up. Okay? Maybe this guy does. Maybe this guy does. Okay? Maybe this guy does. Okay? So this guy's on the processor here. When he finishes, no, not when he finishes. Okay? Not when that process finishes. But when the time quanta expires, okay? It will either be that the time quanta expires and he is still running, okay? In which case, he's going to be go back around and re-enter the queue, okay? Because that's what this is. This is just a queue, okay? People are lining up. It's first come, first serve, first in, first out, to use the notation or the nomenclature of CS, okay? It also might have been that this guy didn't, his time quanta didn't finish, in which case he moved over to blocked, okay, to wait on something. So the time quanta gets reset because we immediately go to the next guy. Either way, the next guy goes on, right? Either he'll finish or he'll get blocked. If he's still running at the time, either way, if he's still running, if he's still ready at the time that his time quanta terminates, he goes, you guessed it, to the end of the line. Okay? All right. This is a situation then where all processes have equal priority. Okay? This is, quote unquote, fair. Right? Everybody, all the processes are going to get a shot at the processor, right? And since it's first in, first out, if you got there first, you got to go first. That appeals to my sense of fairness. Okay? Is it a good scheduling algorithm? Well, one thing it has going for it, and we'll see this pop up again, is that it has no starvation. What do I mean by starvation? Okay, so I think you both said the same thing. This would be a case where a particular process has to wait and wait and wait and wait and never gets to get to the processor. Okay? And this is not going to be the case here, right? You just wait in line. Everybody goes the same amount of time. Once that time is up, it's the next person's turn. Okay? You're guaranteed to get the processor at the same rate, all things being equal, no one getting blocked. Okay? We can't control if you get blocked or not. If you get blocked, sorry, that's not the scheduler's fault. Okay? But all things being equal, no one getting blocked, everyone's going to have the same proportion of the CPU's time. Okay? Same quanta. So again, no starvation. Is this a good algorithm for scheduling, though? So a firm head shake in the negative from the back of the room, the middle part of the room.
It depends on what you're doing.
It does depend on what you're doing. I would agree with that. I would agree. I would couch this as, look, this would be a great algorithm if you knew that you didn't have high priority things, if you didn't need high need things that were in your system, that all the things you were doing were the same need, okay? And the user was not relying on one thing to happen in a given time frame, anything to happen in a given time frame, okay? This would be a great system. So what's wrong with this, though?
For one, if you have a bunch of processes coming at the same time, and let's say that you put something in, and you have to get feedback.
Okay.
Now, depending on how long the quanta is, you may have to sit here for 3 seconds, you may have to sit here for 2 minutes.
Yeah. There's no sense. For one, and this is always a balance that we have to keep, okay? It's a balance we're going to keep coming up again and again. We're going to balance the quanta and the wait time, okay? If everyone's quanta is the same, right, then theoretically everyone's wait time is the same, okay? But that might not be what we want, because we could have some high priority things that need to get done, okay? This approach does not have any useful sense of the term high priority or low priority, right? Process priority does not matter. It's first come, first serve. That's what it is, okay? You're standing in line at the DMV, it doesn't matter who comes in behind you. They don't get to go before you, Okay? We like that at the DMV, somewhat fair, but we might not like it if we're waiting on a critical system and a critical interactive component of the system to come back and tell me, right, if I should turn at the next right or not. Okay? Oh, there it goes. Yeah, you should have turned there. Sorry, we didn't get back to you on time on that one. You know, like that's not useful to me now. Okay? All right, so let's look at some other possible ways to handle this. Well, we know about round robin scheduling, so we could do multi-level scheduling. Okay, I'll put this back on. Can you guys see that? Yes, multi-level scheduling. Sometimes it recognizes my hand, sometimes it doesn't. This is ML scheduling, multi-level scheduling. Instead of having a single round-robin queue, okay, we're gonna have our processor over here. Okay, have our processor right here, and like a funnel that goes to our processor, right? Where only one thing can enter in this funnel at a time, and a series of queues, okay, where there are in such queues, okay? So this might be priority, well, numbering them like this. I don't want to, I hesitate, but let's say priority 1, because to me that means top priority, okay? It might mean that you have to be careful because sometimes priority level 1 means lowest priority, okay? But when I say this, I mean top priority, priority 1, okay? All the way down to priority N, whatever N is, okay? So when a new process arrives, and we talked about some ways to do this, some metrics to use to do this with last time, we calculate its priority. And it starts somewhere in one of these queues. Okay? So maybe this one goes, okay? So this one goes right here. And it immediately gets served and goes into the processor. And so it's running. Meanwhile, 2 more of them arrive. First, this one arrives, okay? And then this one arrives, okay? Question, how long does the yellow, the first thing to arrive, how long does that run? We still have the notion of time quanta here, okay? There's still a fixed amount of time for this process to run in this scheduling algorithm, okay? And he's gonna finish, or he's gonna go to the back of the priority queue at his priority level, okay? Now this guy got here first, and this guy got here second, but who gets to go now that the processor's ready? Blue or green? Why?
Has higher priority.
Has higher priority. Easy, right? Green goes, okay? Meanwhile, some poor schmuck comes in down here somewhere at level whatever, okay? And then there are more things coming in at this level, and these things keep getting put back on at this level and then this level, okay? Right? So we never pull from this level. We never pull from this level until this level is all served, okay? Once top priority things are served, then we can start doing things again in round robin fashion on the second priority, okay? But remember, processes are finishing, they're starting up all the time. They're being added at their priority level. They're waiting on higher priority processes to go. Is this a good scheduling algorithm? What do we have to say positive for it? Priority things get done first. Yeah, if you are top priority, then you are only competing for the processor with other top priority processes that are currently ready. Okay? And if you are second priority, then you are only competing with other second priority things that are ready, and you're all of you second priority things are all waiting on the top priority things to finish, okay, to be completely done. All right, so this is aware, and it's aware of priority. It supports the notion. What's potentially bad about multi-level scheduling? Okay. Did you guys notice this poor little guy down here? Okay. When's it's going to be his turn? There is a non-deterministic wait time for this guy right here. Okay? And here's the thing, right? Here's the thing that this does not capture. One, yeah, it can cause starvation. Okay? But the other thing that this doesn't capture is that the longer that a process starves, the higher its priority might get, the more pressing it might be for us to process that guy. It might have been like, no worries, we got a long time to wait before we need this, okay? And then we wait for a long time, right? It's like getting the dishes dirty, yeah? And I know in my house, the sink fills up. It feels good when you have just done the dishes and there's like cabinets full of clean dishes, and you're like, yeah, give me another dish, right? I need a snack. Give me a plate. Give me a spoon. I'm not gonna use the same spoon for my peanut butter and jelly. We got plenty of spoons, right? Spoon washing is not a high priority right now, right? And we wait, so we do other things first before we get to cleaning the dishes. And for too long, spoon washing is a high priority. Right? There are very few spoons to speak of. Okay, we need it. So that metaphor applies here. We might need this guy, but there's no way to change his priority because he's waiting. He's in this priority queue. He's waiting. Okay, and the fact that there is a time quanta associated with all these things means that like lower priority things are not linearly less likely, but almost exponentially less likely to be served. Okay? Because these guys keep on coming back. And this might take more than one time quanta, so he has to wait forever till it's his turn. He jumps on the processor for one time quanta. He doesn't finish. Where does he go? Right back where he was, waiting for another undetermined amount of time, especially on a busy system. Okay? It could really kill you. Okay? All right, so good, in some senses, definitely better than round robin. But what can we do to have both? What can we do to have both a sense of priority and not have starvation? All right, so that leads us to our third kind of algorithm, and this is the multi-level feedback scheduling, or MLF scheduling, multi-level feedback. So it looks kind of similar to before. We've got our processor over here, okay, processor over here, and we've got n levels of probably round robin queues. Incidentally, each of these queues does not have to strictly be round robin. There could be some other way to prioritize these queues, but it does need to be preemptive. We talked about the difference between preemptive and non-preemptive scheduling algorithms before, right? It has to be preemptive. Anything with a time quanta is going to be preemptive. And it might as well be round robin, just for the sake of argument. So then we got level 1, top priority down here, and level N, lowest priority down here with N levels, okay? But these things tie, yep, here to here, and here to here, okay? And here to here. Okay, so in other words, what happens is, all right, so yeah, there is the arrival of a top priority process, and it immediately goes on to the processor, okay? Then a slightly lower priority process arrives and is blocked, or is ready for the processor, but something's already running, okay? And this thing that's running there is still going to run for a specific time quanta, okay? Still going to run for a specific time quanta. While the green guy is waiting on the yellow guy to finish, another top priority thing arrives, okay? Now, one thing that's changed for multi-level feedback is that no longer does each level use the same time quanta, okay? So there's a basic time quanta, let's call it Q, okay? And Q is the time quanta for level 1, right? So things that enter from the level 1 queue onto the processor are going to run for Q chunks, okay, for Q time. Things that enter from here are going to run from 2 times Q, okay? Things down here, 4 times Q, okay? And so each successive level gets a multiple of 2 more time for their processes to run, okay? And that's good. You can see how that would be helpful, because if poor little guy right here comes in, he's not going to get to run for some time, potentially, depending on the workload of all of the priority levels, priority queues, not priority queues, carefully, queues at different priority levels above his priority level, okay? Depending on how many come in, he might not run for a long time. They're all running lower amounts of time, though, okay? And so when it finally does get to be his time, I don't know, he's got a big chunk of time to run. And that's fair. It seems fairer anyway, because he's had to wait longer. He jumps on the processor, he runs, he's got longer to finish. Maybe he finishes, in which case he leaves the system, or leaves the schedule, okay? His process finished, great. Maybe he comes back, but he got a lot done in that huge chunk of time. All right? So that's one step that we used. Does that alone solve the starvation problem? Nope. No, it doesn't. That's what these weird cross lines are about, okay? So what this means is that once a process leaves a level, goes onto the processor, it does not return at the level that it entered. It returns at one level below that, okay? So this keeps high process things from clogging up the system, right? High process things still get to go first. They still get priority, okay? But they don't get to go first again. They have to wait for other high process. Well, that's what they were going to do anyway, right? That's what they're going to do anyway. As those processes come out of the highest processor thing, they stack up now on the second highest processor thing, And now they get 2 times more quanta to run on the processor. Well, this guy green, he gets to go first. After all these guys clear out of the top level, he gets to go first. He gets 2 times the quanta, right? And then all the other what were higher process things get to go. And they all stack up at the next level below that if they're not done yet, okay? And the last trick is the lowest level gets an infinite quanta, okay? And if you've been in the system or you started low enough in the system, or you've been in the system long enough to make it all the way to the bottom, okay? Then you've been in the system for a long time and you haven't finished yet. Or if you start in the bottom, you're going to potentially wait in the system for a long time for everything else kind of flow through the system and line up behind you, potentially. So once it's your turn, you run until you're finished, okay? And that prevents starvation, okay? So that's good. This is the multi-level feedback scheduling algorithm. Any questions about that?
You're saying that system does not have starvation?
Yeah, it does not.
Well, that would depend on what else is coming in.
So it does, but if you ever process anything, right? If you ever process anything, the system trickles down to the bottom, right? There's 2 kinds of starvation. There's a kind of starvation where we've just got too much to do and we can't get to everything, right? And that's not what we're talking about. Eventually, right? Let's say you got a load of processes and they line up and they pile in, okay? So in the real world, your worst case, the worst case you're imagining is, a bunch of high priority things keep piling in, right? And they only run once, and then they go to the next level, and then they only run once, and they go to the next level, and they only run once, and they go to the next level, okay? But I'm going to argue that you don't have a world where the system just keeps getting hammered on, right? Eventually, we're going to stop asking the computer to do things and wait for it to finish something, okay? And if we need it to finish something, then it will trickle down through that system, eventually finishing some things, eventually finishing some things, right? And if we can get to the lowest level thing, then it's guaranteed to run. That's pretty much the best we can do, right?
If that were the case, though, wouldn't the other methods not cause starvation either?
So let's look at this one, okay? You don't have under any circumstance the notion that this last one will ever be run, okay? Even if we get to it, it won't finish necessarily, okay? So at least if this one runs, it finishes, okay? If it gets to the last level. I see your criticism, and I guess we should be careful to better define what starvation is. It's because starvation is not an either or thing, it's a matter of magnitude, right? How starved are those things that are going to be starved in the worst case? Right, does that make sense? So that's what I would say. Other questions? Okay. All right, so here's where we talk about the trade-off that we are balancing, though. Because the trade-off that we're balancing is between the cost of context switching and the quanta size, the size of the quanta, okay? Because what we want to maximize response time and have the highest throughput. So let's talk about what response time is. That's the time from an interactive request being made to the response being given. And that's what response time is. Notice that the process has to be on the processor to do any of the following three things. To either receive a request, to process a request, or to reply. I'm not writing anything.
Oh, I just saw another.
Yeah. To receive a request, to process the request, or to reply to the request, the process has to be on the processor. Right? Receive, process, reply. It's not like you can receive a request, receive before E except after C, right? Okay. Process and reply. These are all things that only the running process can do. Okay. So what's your instinct? Should we have a high quanta, like a very large quanta, or should we have a small quanta?
Typically short, because it doubles every level anyway. So eventually he will get to a very large quanta.
Okay, but still, let's presume I'm not assuming any specific scheduling algorithm at this point, but yeah, let's assume it is MLF. Okay, multi-level feedback. The initial quanta determines still a lot about how efficient that system is, right? Because with a bigger initial quanta, 2 times a bigger initial quanta is a really big quanta, right? So the question still stands, do we want to start with, or do we want to have, in scheduling systems where the quanta doesn't change, do we want to have a large quanta or a small quanta?
I'll still stand by a small one because that way you check through multiple
Okay.
processes.
Okay, so your notion is, I want a small quanta. Okay. All right, so what does a small quanta mean? That means that we are going to be limited in how much we can process before being context switched. Right? Do you agree with that? Okay. It also means that we are going to, with a small quanta, we maximize, the smaller the quanta is, we maximize the number of context switches, which I think was a feature that you were after, right? Because you said, well, with a small quanta, we get to swap out more often.
Check for user input or anything else.
Okay, but that also means that we have lots of overhead. Okay, so we maximize the amount of time that the processor is not doing anything useful in terms of processing processes, and is maximized its amount of time that it's working to switch the processes out. Right, does that make sense? And that's not a friendly balance, okay? Because like, imagine what can happen. So let me see if I can figure out a good way to draw this. So you've got a process. You've got a process, and its lifetime might look like this, okay? And this is just a snapshot of its lifetime. But in here, we've got its lifetime. And let's say blue is that it receives a request. Okay, it's got to be it's got to be on the, it's got to be running, it's got to be on the processor to fully receive this request. Okay? Then green is where we process the request, and that takes some amount of time. Again, none of my scheduling can help decrease that amount of time. It takes the amount of time that it takes. Okay? And then yellow, let's say, is responding to that request. Okay? And this is just a snippet of what might happen inside that process. It's doing stuff, but before this, it's doing stuff after it. Okay, it's got a longer lifetime than just this. So this is, again, this is receive, this is process, and this is reply. Okay, so with a smaller quanta, these chunks of time are going to be divided up. So a small quanta, okay, into much narrower chunks. Okay, and that's fine if we're the only thing running and if there's no added overhead for swapping things out. But notice the more narrow chunks there are, the more likely we are to have a narrow chunk that appears right here. Okay? So again, yes, you are correct. This is me coming up with the worst case scenario. Okay? But our system is going to be judged by how it performs in the worst case scenario. Here's a little trick about human psyche, human psychology. Humans always remember when bad things happen with much more impact than when good things happen. Okay? You don't remember the times you didn't hit a deer, but you remember with great clarity the times that you did hit a deer. Okay? Does that make sense? If you ever hit a deer, you know what I'm talking about. Right? All right, so worst case scenario, we get the request and then we have to be context switched out right here. Okay? What does that mean for us under a small quanta? What that means is everybody else gets to go. Well, everybody at our priority level at the very least gets to go. Okay? And yeah, sure, they've got a small quanta too. Okay? But we have maximized the number of context switches. So we have maximized the total amount of time that we have to wait, not only for other processes to run through their quanta, but also for us to swap out that many times. Okay? And so there could be a long wait between receiving the thing and processing the thing. Okay, does that make sense? Must there be? No, there doesn't have to be. This is very chaotic, okay? But again, I'm talking about worst case scenario. So is this an argument in and of itself for having larger quanta? Well, that seems to be the other option. And you are not wrong.
I don't care if I am wrong.
You are not wrong. You're not wrong, all right? But the other option is, let's have a larger quanta, okay? So what that means is, that's the opposite, right? We're getting rid of a lot of these context switches, okay? And we're just dividing this up into huger chunks of time, okay? And so that's a positive. We are minimizing our wait time for context switching, but we are duly increasing our wait time for other processes. Okay? So again, what's a possible worst case scenario? We're like, well, this is great, right? Because now with this larger quanta, there's not a division right here. We get to process both the receiving of the request and the processing of the request. Oh, but my God, we just got really unlucky and we got kicked off right before the reply. Okay? Does it matter to the user? Right? Does it matter to the user if they're waiting on us to do the processing or waiting on us to reply? No, they don't have any idea what the internal state of the computer is, right? So there's still a possibility that we can have a long wait time not because of context switching overhead, but because of having to wait on other processes. Okay? Is there a silver bullet solution that's going to work for every case? No, there's not. Okay. We have to make our best effort shot at. Obviously, we don't want the smallest possible quanta. Obviously, we don't want the largest possible quanta. Think about what that would mean. That would mean do one instruction for every process. That would mean let every process run till it was finished. Okay, largest possible quanta. The perfect balance or the proper balance is somewhere in between those two things. Okay? And we need to know something about the processes in our system. How many are there going to be? That's going to have an effect. How long is their average runtime, or how long is the runtime of each process? That's going to have an effect. Okay? Any questions? Any questions?
There's quanta has to be fixed from the beginning.
So that is true for all the schedules we've talked about, but it is false in general.
That's what my follow-up would be, is can you not adjust the quanta depending on the number of processes from any time?
Yes. Yes. Okay. I like where you're going. Okay. I like where you're going. And one of the things that we're going to talk about in that vein are real. You guys can't see this. Hold on. Okay. Real-time processors. Because this definitely comes up with real-time processors. Okay. What are some examples of some real-time processes? What does that mean? Right? It means that the system requires that the input be processed and responded to in a fixed amount of time, or in an amount of time, okay, called the period. It's the interval of time within which each input must be processed. That's called the period. Okay. Think of some systems that require real-time processing, real-time scheduling. What are some real-time processes?
Probably like a video conferencing.
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the ones that is most on everyone's mind, I think. Video conferencing, but also streaming any kind of information, right? Because the human mind can't take having large gaps between like processing what someone's saying, was like, you know, and you just like, they're speaking English, but I can't put it together in my mind, right? It doesn't make sense. It's hard to follow. Okay, so video. I made a joke earlier about GPS. Okay. Radar. Okay. For transportation, especially in high-speed transportation. Speaking of which, fly-by-wire, and also more important to you, drive-by-wire. What fly-by-wire means is that, like, in early, how many of you guys have ever been to Kitty Hawk and seen the Wright Flyer or the model of it that exists there? Yeah, so you've seen the model at the Smithsonian? So there are a lot of wires on that plane, right? And one thing that it doesn't have is it doesn't have the sense of, it doesn't have flaps, okay? So when you're flying an airplane, you have 6 degrees of freedom, right? You've got elevation, right? You've got yaw, you got pitch, and you've got roll. Okay, so yaw, pitch, and roll are your 6 degrees of freedom, right? That's what we mean, because you can do positive yaw, negative yaw, positive yaw, rather, positive yaw, negative roll, positive pitch, negative pitch, okay, in free space, right? And to control, so they had the notion of a rudder. He pulled on a wire, he pulled on a stick, and changed the rudder in the back to control the yaw. But they didn't have flaps on the wings, so he had to actually shift his body, and his body was connected to wires to torque the wings, okay, to get it to roll or pitch, okay, and that sucked. That's why the flight was only for like 30 seconds, right? Because first airplane. Well, all airplanes past that still had a series of controls in the cockpit, right? And when you pulled on a control, there was a physical component, a physical like wire usually, that pulled on the controls behind you or to the side of you to make the control surfaces move in a certain way. So what fly-by-wire is now you have a computer, okay? And you've still got the same controls, but those controls are inputs. It's like a joystick, effectively. It's an input to a computer. And then the computer runs a servo that twists the airplane the way you want it to go, okay? So now there's no more connection between what you're doing with the yoke and what's happening on the control surfaces of the plane, right? In the same way, when you drove your car, I assume it was a fairly late model car. When you drove your car here today, you cranked up the engine and you torqued on the steering wheel, okay? There was no physical connection between the steering wheel and the wheels themselves, okay? In old cars, you used to be able to leave them in neutral and turn it off, and then you could actually torque the steering wheel and the wheels would move, okay? New cars don't do that, right? New cars that are fully drive-by-wire, you can torque that steering wheel all you want, and it does not have a stop point, okay? Because it's not a wheel that's attached to your tires, it's a wheel that is a sensory input to a computer, right? When you press on the brake, right? How do analog brake systems work? You're stupid. You have a stupid meat brain. The computer knows that even though you're pressing hard on this brake, if it does what you say, you're gonna slide off the road and end up wrapped around a telephone pole, okay? So instead, it uses its connection through servos and other mechanisms to tap the brake. Tap, 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 tap. And that's why you're pushing down that brake as hard as you can and you're going, ho, 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 right? And that maintains traction. You didn't do that. The computer did that, okay? You're driving by wire, okay? You told the computer what you wanted to do, and the computer made its mind up for you about what really needed to happen. Okay? Anyway, does that make sense? So, fly by wire, drive by wire. Sometimes it's not too serious. Sometimes it's pretty darn serious. So, this changes the game a little bit for scheduling. So let's look at some algorithms that try and make it so that we can respond to a process within a certain period, okay? So the first one of these is called the rate monotonic algorithm. This is RM, the rate monotonic algorithm. It's easy. The shorter the period, the higher the priority. Okay? So priority is equal to period. Okay? What did I say period was? Period is the time by which the process must finish. Okay? Time by which the process must finish. So it's like you got a small chunk of time in which you have to finish. Okay? Small chunk of time in which you have to finish. Then you get to go first. And on the surface, this seems great. But imagine, so now we've got our period. So this is the period for process 1. And let's say this slightly longer period is the one for process 2. How much time this takes is not a function of the period, though. Okay? All right? So this inner rectangle represents the amount of processing, amount of CPU time that this guy's going to take. Okay? So process 1 has a shorter period, and process 2 has a longer period. So which one does rate monotonic algorithm let go first? Let's process 1 go first. It has a shorter period. Okay? Maybe this is even long enough. Okay, maybe this is even long enough to fit 2 of these periods in. Right, so this guy goes first, and we end up right here on the timeline. And now this guy still has a slightly shorter period than this guy. Okay, because that's where process 1 ended up, and then it was right here to begin with, process 1. Okay? Now process 1 still has a shorter period, so it gets scheduled first. But unfortunately, it's not going to finish. Right? It's not going to finish before process 2 runs out of time. Okay? Whereas we could have let process 2 start running, right? And so we didn't. So the problem with rate monotonic algorithm, is that it might be prioritizing short-running processes with slightly smaller periods, but a higher margin of error, over long-running processes, higher periods with longer periods, but much less margin of error. Because in our evaluation of priority, surely it's this amount of time that we need to consider as it relates to this. Okay? Because this guy could run twice in the amount of period that he has. This guy can't run twice. He could run less than 2 times in the amount of period that he has. Right? Now, the period has always got to be longer or equal to the runtime. But simply because you have a shorter period doesn't mean that you should get to go first. And like the worst, this guy has a really long period because he takes almost the entire period to run, right? Any schedule that says, hey, this guy gets to go first, dooms this guy not to finish before his period is out. Okay, does that make sense? And that is exactly what rate monotonic algorithm would do. It would say, yeah, you've got a shorter period. You must need to go first. All right, any questions about that? So we're following the same pattern. I started with round robin, which obviously is just kind of a straw man. It's not going to work for us. And now I've started with rate monotonic, which is the most obvious thing. And it's not going to work for us either. So what about earliest deadline first? About earliest deadline first, or EDF. Okay, earliest deadline first. So the shorter the remaining time, the higher the priority. And by remaining time, I mean the gap, this gap versus this gap. Okay? The time left after you start running the program before you run out of your period. Okay? We want to capture these gaps and prioritize based on those gaps. Okay? Does that make sense? And to talk for just a second about your notion of a changing priority, well, you may recall before that we already last week talked about how we reevaluate the priority each time it goes from running to ready. Okay? And we can reevaluate these priorities as well, right? How far into this are we? How much runtime do we have left versus how much space we have remaining before that period is out? Okay? You can think of these, and the book does a good job of having an animation that does this for you, but think of these chunks as being able to slide back and forth within this period. Thank you. Being able to slide back and forth within that period. Okay? All right, so what are we doing? We're doing earliest deadline first, EDF. All right, so is that a good approach? Well, there's the short answer to that is yes, that is a good approach. The long answer is that there's a problem with real-time scheduling, right? And that problem is that real-time scheduling is not always feasible, okay? So let's talk about what I mean when I say feasibility or feasible. A schedule is feasible if there is some scheduling where all deadlines can be met. Okay? How do we know if a schedule is feasible or not? So let's define T sub I as the total CPU time for process I. And we'll also define D sub I as the period of process I. So then we can define T sub I over D sub I as the fraction of CPU time used by a process. Okay, so that's a ratio of the amount of time it needs to the amount of time that it has. Okay, so the CPU utilization is the sum of all the T sub I over D sub I. Utilization equals the sum of all T sub I over D sub I, where I goes from, well, let's call it 1 to N. Okay? That's the total CPU utilization required for the entire system. So if U equals 1, then that means we've got 100% CPU utilization. Okay? If it's less than 1, then that means that it's feasible. If it's greater than 1, then that means that it's not feasible. Okay? Less than 100% utilization is feasible. More than 100% utilization, what does that mean? I just don't have that time. I got no time. I don't have enough CPU to go around. That's not feasible. So it's not surprising then that rate monotonic algorithms are not guaranteed to produce a feasible schedule. And it's useful to note that EDF is guaranteed to produce a feasible schedule. Okay, if we can do that. It's guaranteed to produce a feasible schedule as long as one exists. Okay. Rate monotonic, not guaranteed to produce a feasible schedule ever, but studies have shown that as long as your U is less than 0.7, then you have a better than even chance of rate monotonic giving you a feasible schedule. And of course, the lower you can't see that. Damn it. The lower your U is, the easier it is to come up with a feasible schedule. Okay. All right, any questions about that? So I went a little fast there. Does anyone need to see anything? D sub I over here. This one? Period. Yeah. Period of process I. So in other words, this is just a ratio of the amount of CPU time they need versus the period that they have. Okay. As long as the sum of all such ratios is less than or equal to 1, then there is a feasible schedule. Incidentally, if it's equal to 1, then what that means is there's some schedule where there's some perfect schedule where everybody gets to go, right? But you will find that schedule if you run earliest deadline first. So you get the shortest remaining time, the priority. Okay. All right. We're out of time, and I'm just about out of things to tell you anyway. This material covers 3.3 and 3.4. 3.5 talks about some combined approaches. Right, so I'll leave that as an exercise for you to read about. Real world system use some combined version of all the algorithms that we've talked about because it's not efficient to run merely interactive or batch processes as if they are real time, right? You waste time treating them like they're real time when they don't have the restrictions that real time algorithms have, real time processes have. So usually you treat real time processes one way and give them a higher priority overall, and you treat interactive and batch processes in some other method, and usually it's a mixture of some of the algorithms that we've talked about. Okay, and section 5 does some good work going over some high-level details of that stuff. So yeah, there's reading for this week for the Xi books. The participation and challenge activities for those sections are counting as a grade for you again, as they always do. All right, any questions for me? Yes. I think so. Possible I haven't made it visible. Yes. Just now, in fact. Yes. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Your question?
Do we have a midterm exam?
No.
I have one coming up, but I want to figure out.
Yeah, no. No. All right, I'll see you guys next week. The homework is due Thursday, and there will be another homework coming out. Okay, so keep your eye out for that.